Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Pellavita. I'll be your moderator for today's topic. And today is a very interesting topic. We're going to be discussing elimination of the Department of Education. Now, this was originally proposed by none other than Donald Trump. And at first I thought, this guy's crazy. Why would you eliminate the Department of Education? But then I started digging and I was going, he actually might have some reasons to do that. In a previous show, we did discuss eliminating the Department of Labor, and I can tell you that it came in 58%. Here was the vote on Pod TV poll. Eliminating Department of Labor, say $15 billion a year. Pod TV LinkedIn poll, 52% said yes, 48% said no. Now, when it comes to eliminating the Department of Education, you actually have more no's than yeses, but they may be like me. When I first saw this proposed by Trump saying, what are you talking about? Everybody's for education, until you start digging into the Department of Education. Then here's what we found out. Number one, the Department of Education, they're on tune to bring us 900 billion more in debt in the next 10 years. Okay, that's a big problem. Problem number two, remember the Supreme Court case where they said the student loans can't be forgiven? I hope you remember the Andrew Jackson when he removed the Indians from the Trail of Tears. He told the Supreme Court, you made your decision, now enforce it. And the Supreme Court couldn't enforce it. Well, Joe Biden said, well, you made your decision to not allow me to eliminate loans. I'm going to eliminate them anyway. You made your decision, Supreme Court, now enforce it. And apparently they can't. So they're eliminating right now about 200 billion in loans. Problem number three I've seen, the budget. The budget of the Department of Labor never mentions, isn't even in there, science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, why don't they do it? Because if you read through the Department of Labor's budget, it's mainly a social cause budget. It shouldn't even be in education. It's like all these social things thrown in there. But interesting, Department of Education budget never even utters a word of science, technology, engineering, math. Another problem. K through 12 education in the United States, not even the top 25, according to PISA scores. That's not good. We don't even make the top 25 in the world. And of course, medicine, law, engineering, pharmacy, and business are all ignored by the Department of Education. Further, what's ignored? Plumbing, electrician, construction, welding, automotive, computer tech, all ignored by the Department of Education. So after having that brilliant report card, they want $90 billion or a 13% increase for what I call a D grade. So somebody comes to you and they're failing miserably and they want an increase. Who do you go to? Washington, D.C. Who do we go to? As soon as I get my buzzer off, we go to the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and then we'll go to our panel. So, David, I did my opening statement. I just go, first of all, I thought Trump was crazy. Then I went through their budget and I go, well, maybe he's not crazy. But what are your thoughts about the Department of Education?
Well, it's good to be back with you, Nick. I can be with you for about 45 minutes this morning. As we talked about last week, when we talked about the Department of Labor, there's a need to step back and fundamentally reassess what needs to be done, who needs to do it, how best to get it done. The federal government has grown too big. It's promised too much. It's subsidized too many. It's lost control of the budget. It's assumed more responsibility for things that, quite frankly, could be better done at the state and local level, which is, frankly, what the founders envisioned. Last week, we talked about the Department of Labor. This week, it's the Department of Education. It's a little bit sad that we're talking about the possibility of eliminating the Department of Education when Rosalynn Carter just passed away yesterday. May she rest in peace. And when Jimmy Carter, who created the Department of Education as a spinoff from HEW, probably doesn't have a lot more time with us here on this earth. But the fact is the Department of Education, in my view, has largely been a failure. And one of the things that we need to do is that we need to recognize what are the functions and activities that should be performed and who is best to perform them. Most education in this country is determined at the local level through school boards. Yes, there are departments of education in each of the states. And so the real question is, why do you need a federal Department of Education with the type of results that we've been getting, which are just totally unacceptable? Not top 25 in the world in K through 12 education. So I think what we need to do is we need to say, what do they do? And to the extent that it ought to be done, to what extent should it be done at the state or local level, or to what extent can it be done by another department or agency? For example, to me, education is a key part of competitiveness. And my view is that one of the things we ought to be thinking about is creating a department of competitiveness that would merge. I'm not talking about a new department. I'm talking about, for example, changing the Department of Commerce to focus much more broadly on competitiveness, which would include things like education. You properly point out that right now, we've got the largest asset on the balance sheet of the U.S. government is student loans, over $1 trillion in student loans. That program has got to be fundamentally re-engineered. And frankly, the federal government shouldn't be the one issuing the loans. The federal government should only be guaranteeing loans issued by the private sector in circumstances where those loans make sense, where people are getting degrees from institutions and or trade certificates, which is something we ought to be pushing much more, where we need from a macro standpoint in the country. And yes, we ought to think about providing some student loan forgiveness, but only in exchange for service. So the education department, I think, has not done us well. There are certain functions that need to be performed, but you don't need a whole separate department to be able to do that. And the federal government shouldn't be in some of the businesses that it's in right now, overall, as well as it relates to the Department of Education. So those are just a few preliminary thoughts.
Okay, we'll go to our panel, and we have from the head of Wall Street Hackers, we're going to bring in Peter Bennett. Peter, I guess you have some opinions on the Department of Education also. This was proposed by Donald Trump. Like I said, I first thought, how could he be against education? Then when I read through the budget, the Department of Education has nothing to do with education right now. It has a lot to do with social causes, but has nothing to do with education. And they want an increase of 13% when they failed the students, when K through 12, where we keep going down, we're not even in the top 25. So what are your thoughts about the Department of Education?
Well, I had several thoughts, but addressing first a few points that David brought up, we have unfathomable debt in the United States, and we need to cut debt. I mean, everybody's concerned about the 33 trillion, but what I'm concerned about is the possible 100 or 200 trillion that is off the books for Medicare and Social Security. And by the way, other countries in the world have the same situation. Other countries maybe even providing full health care for aging populations. This is such a structural imbalance that nobody really addresses year to year. So you have to cut where you can, and that won't even be enough. But you need to do everything you can to start dealing with this potential tidal wave that's coming. The other thing David brought up is the college situation. And I've been saying on my show, Wall Street Hackers, and so long, I've mentioned this, that, if the federal government wasn't giving all these college loans, the cost of college tuition would have grown much more gradually. It's grown much faster than inflation. It sucks all the life out of the middle class and even the upper middle class. And the reason it's so expensive is because the federal government gives the kids $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 that they wouldn't have had. And so the colleges get bloated. They have professors often who teach maybe 2 classes or 3 classes and do research. They build big buildings. They have a purpose. And then sometimes they get very, let's say, disoriented in terms of what they're teaching. But so now to what I was going to say. So number one, in general, it works better to have control by individuals, in my opinion, in a free society over state control. and state control being the states over the federal government. This is something that's been discussed since our Constitution was created, and battles with Adams and everything else. But the reason I'm especially in education like the idea of individual and state control is, one, if you have state control, you have 50 different experiments going on. And education, is so poor in the United States, for one thing. But the other thing is, with 50 different experiments, states can learn from each other. If you have a unified system from the federal government, it's just basically that Washington dictating one policy that may or may not work. So that's what competition is about in the free markets and also in education. And the other thing is, we get into this later, but I'm very in favor of individual control in terms of school choice and charter schools. It's worked very well in Florida. I'll talk about that later maybe. But if you're going to move it down to the individual choice level, especially, you don't need the federal government to tell the states, or even the states to tell the individuals. Let people choose where they want to send their kids, so there's competition. And this can actually help the public system. And it did in Florida, because it improved the public schools when they had to compete against the private schools. So those are my initial thoughts.
Okay, we're going to bring in Kim Calhoun, one of the founders of the network, and see what she has to say about this particular issue, which deals with elimination of the Department of Education. I did go read through the budget. I had to read through it twice. It was proposed by Trump to eliminate the Department of Education. I thought, Trump's crazy. Then all you have to do is go read through the budget. It has nothing to do with education. They don't even mention science, technology, engineering, math. They don't mention the trades. They don't help fund the industries of the future. But it is designed to fund social causes, $90 billion in social causes. So if they change the name to the Department of Social Causes, then that's fine. But please don't hide under education. A budget has nothing to do with education. Anyway, that's my thoughts. What are yours, Kim?
Well, my thoughts are this happens all the time. They, one, should be held very accountable for misleading everybody with the title of whatever it is they're petitioning to do, or policies that they're pushing. Like we saw what happened here in North Carolina with McCrory, when he, pushed a bill and said that it was about victims, and it was more about saying, gay people have no rights, but it wasn't anything about protecting victims, right? They had every other law in there besides protecting victims of domestic violence. He said, you have a right to fire gay people. You have it was everything but that. So he got everyone riled up about the title and into it because of the title, and pushing it because of the title, and nobody read it. So I think, one, nothing should be written at all unless it's less words than what the Constitution is. I mean, bills do not have to be 3,000 pages or 186 pages long to define what your intent is or what your agenda is. And I think that's very important. And I think it should be, the title should match precisely. And if it's found that it's not, then I think somebody needs to be fined and punished and fired for lying and pushing a lie. So I think, and that's something that we have seen time and time again. Do we need to be cutting a budget for education? Absolutely not. But I mean, it depends on, why they were wanting to cut it or get rid of a department. I think we need to get accountability departments. And I think we need to start firing people for misleading people with titles like that. That's what I think.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with education.
No, I mean,
unless we want to educate people on what the bills say. So then we have a show that reads the bills and talks about what they really say.
It's like the Inflation Reduction Act had nothing to do with
hear you.
inflation. Oh,
well, unfortunately, truth and advertising laws
Nick,
do not
you're
apply
muted.
to politics and government.
David, I can't hear David.
I said,
Okay.
unfortunately, truth.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you. You have some problems.
I
on your
can't
end.
hear any of you.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
Kim,
that's
it's on your side.
on your side.
Yeah.
You may want to come back in, Kim.
Okay. We also have overseas, we have Shaquille Latmer. Now he doesn't have any.
Hi, Shaq. Can anybody
No,
hear
no.
me?
We
Yeah,
can
we
all
can
hear
hear
you. Yes.
Hear us. Got to fix your computer.
All right.
You don't have any dog in this
Weird.
hunt because you're in Australia. But what are your thoughts about Trump wanting to eliminate our Department of Education? And then I read through that. I don't know if you read through the budget. There was nothing to do
I
with
can't hear you.
very little education. You know.
Well, well, I mean, given that all the countries I live in rank higher than the US, I'm not sure I'm in a good position to say what you should do over there. But look, I think this is a problem. I mean, we in Australia and elsewhere, we're seeing some of our education levels fall. It's got to be a concerning problem at some level for people in government that our competitors like China, Japan, Taiwan, all these countries rank really highly. For Australia, one of our biggest competitors as a financial hub for this region of the world is Singapore. They rank number one in all three of these areas. The German kids are reading and writing and speaking English at a higher proficiency than we are in Western countries where the majority of us grow up speaking English. I mean, this is a terrible situation. I think looking at the US, I think that you really do need to put more power in the hands of parents and families. I do like the idea that Milton Friedman had with school vouchers and things like that, where parents could actually use that money to educate their kids how they see fit. But I also think that perhaps you need to get away from just academic education. There are some kids that just aren't interested or just aren't good at it. And I used to think it was a good idea to just make them go through school because they need to get an education. But I've changed my mind on that as I've gotten older. I think that it would be better to take those kids that perhaps have greater affinity to other subjects, more trades-based subjects, and let them focus their time on that. And those countries that have tried that have tended to do quite well. Sorry, Dave.
No. Go ahead, Shaquille. Let me finish. I just want to go on after you. Go right ahead.
Yeah. I think that those are effective things. I think we should be trying everything. One of the problems that I would say, which I think is much more pronounced in a country as big as the United States, is when you have that top-down type of system. The national curriculum is something which was a little bit controversial when it was brought out here in Australia, because why do you want to teach kids in country Western Australia the same as you're going to teach the kids in inner city Melbourne? That doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of cases. And I think that that's even more pronounced when you're talking about the United States. It has a population 14 times as big as ours, to have this sort of top-down national education objective. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And just lastly, one of the things with education as well is kids will be made to do certain sports. And I know even here I've got little girls that live next door to me, and one of them really likes gymnastics, but she's forced to do ballet, or maybe it's the other way around. She really likes ballet, but she's forced to do gymnastics. Why? And the gymnastics school is just across the road from her school. So can't she just opt out of that and then go to something that she's more interested in? But the school system doesn't allow for that to happen. And so kids end up being forced to do things that they don't want to do. And when I went to school, I was forced to do art. I suck at art. I can't even draw a stick figure properly. So I think that there needs to be more flexibility. Parents need to have more control. So, yeah, get rid of the education department. Just give the money to the parents in the form of vouchers and let them choose. Dave.
Well, thank you, Shaquille. I think we need to determine what are we trying to accomplish, okay? And government, unfortunately, doesn't do that often. I mean, we need to promote economic growth. We need to promote individual opportunity. We need to make sure that we maintain our competitive posture in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. A key part of that is education. It's also a key part of it, not from the macro standpoint, but also from the individual standpoint, for them to be able to maximize their opportunity and their ability to have a decent quality of life. In doing that, there are certain fundamental knowledge and skills that everybody needs to have. We're talking about reading, writing, arithmetic, some exposure to science, if you will. But there are also other things that they need to have, whether they go to college or not. I'll come back to that. And that is, they need to have financial literacy. They need to have civic responsibility. Those should be mandatory before they graduate high school. In addition to that, we need to recognize that, contrary to longstanding belief, college is not for everybody. Not all colleges are equal. Not all degrees are equal. We need to try to learn from other countries as well. For example, Germany. Germany does a much better job of trying to ascertain what are the skills and abilities and interests of individuals. And then they try to match the skills, interests, and abilities of the individuals with the needs of the economy, which includes promoting the trades, which includes other occupations that the country needs, that the individuals might be more geared towards and might enjoy more, and where they can make a decent standard of living and raise a family and have a decent quality of life. So, I think our education department is a perfect example of where people are well intended. How can you be against education? Nobody's against education. It's like defense. How can you be against defense? Nobody's against defense. But as Ross Perot would say, we got to lift the hood. We got to look underneath. We got to define what we're trying to accomplish. We got to make sure we're focused on the right things. And we got to hold people accountable for results. We're not doing any of that. And it's not just the Department of Education.
So I want to.
Well, I think it's because we're not educating people on what the policies are and what's truly on the title versus what's in the meat of what they're petitioning, which is what is happening here or happened here. But it happens all the time. And I think you're right. It's a lack of education of that information. And I think it needs to begin there as well. I think the adults need to know what's really going on behind the scenes.
And I'm all for more school choice. Peter needs to come in now. I'm all for more school choice. I'm all for empowering parents.
Exactly.
But parents have to assume responsibility.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We have parents that don't. Peter, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to emphasize a little more and get into what happened in Florida, because Florida had one of the worst state scores, general scores in terms of test scores and also college admissions. They were really doing poorly. They, for years now, have been pushing charter schools. And as a matter of fact, recently in Florida, Governor DeSantis in Florida passed a law, which I thought was really interesting. They passed a law that said $10,000 can be used for each student for charter schools or tutoring. So that was, I think, very unique. And also, because that way, if you want to stay in public school, you can get tutoring. But the other interesting things about this move towards charter schools is, one, Florida then became third best, I believe, in this country on test scores. College admissions went up, but the public schools improved a lot because competition drove them to reform themselves. They focused, I'm guessing, more on reading, writing, and education. That's just a guess. But whatever they did, they improved their quality because they knew they had to meet the competition. So competition, just like in free market capitalism, creates drive. And it created a lot of improvement in Florida. And I think that's a nice model for the country. And if you're going to do that, even less likely you need to spend a lot on the Department of Education.
Competition is key.
Sorry.
No, competition is key, not just in education, but across the board. And results is what we need to focus on. Shaquille, please.
I was just going to say, this is the problem with big government and these bloated budgets. If Peter Bennett employed me to teach his children and I gave him those sorts of results, the gall that I would have to ask Peter to pay me more the following year for those bad results, Peter's going to say, what, are you kidding me? And the really sad thing for the United States, you guys all know how much I love and adore your country, but based on the education results and the cost per pupil across the country, Americans would be better off sending their kids to be educated in Canada and give the Canadians the money. And Canada is a far less powerful and prestigious country, apparently. So, I mean, you really have to compare yourself against your peer group. And I think that falling behind this way is a great tragedy. And it shouldn't happen. I mean, the United States used to be the envy of the world in these areas. The United States used to be, the top 5 consistently across these subjects, and now it's not. And that doesn't bode well, because those kids are going to be in politics in 20 and 30 years. Those kids are going to be running the place. And, what are they going to teach their children? So it's a real, I think we've really let this generation down. We have to do something for them.
But I think the question is, what has happened? Why are we where we are? And what needs to change in order to get us to where we need to be? And part of it obviously might be government policy, but part of it could be other things, including public sector unions.
Well, I want to add
Oh, yeah,
something
public- yeah, well,
into this about the education system. We still don't put enough money into our education system. And I help and work with a woman who is a elementary school teacher in a impoverished area, right? They don't get anything. They really don't. The kids barely have enough food to eat. And so I still think we are not putting enough money just into the public school system. I'm a big fan of the charter schools, which are, not you don't have to pay to go to them. They're a little bit better infrastructure for parents to be involved in. And they're, free. And but more money goes into them. But I think we need to put more money into our school system, as well as, like David said, we need to teach financial literacy so that information grows with these children as they get older. Maybe it goes home with them. They can have these conversations at home with their parents. And all of this just, cycles into our society the way it should.
I'll just say, though, first of all, I think that American schools should be teaching American children to be proud of America instead of finding all of her flaws. It's such a beautiful country, and why kids are growing up with such a dislike for their own country, to me, is a miseducation. But just on the point of there needs to be more funding here. Just to slightly change the subject, in the UK, what they found was they increased funding for healthcare, but they had less doctors and nurses because all the money went to administrative staff. I fear that this is the problem that you're finding in the education system in the United States, because, again, if you look at the cost per pupil spent by state and federal governments, and then you compare it to your peer group, you find the United States, in many cases, and in some states, actually spend much more money and get much worse results. And in Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, I remember that he did something on education. He actually talked about 2 different schools in 2 different places that actually had about the same expenditure, and yet they had vastly different results. So I don't think money in and of itself is the issue. I think there is a culture. I think the teachers union has a lot to answer for in the United States, as well as over here in Australia. All these things I think need to be addressed, but just simply pumping money in isn't going to be the problem. It needs to be, where is that money going?
Right. I have to agree with
value for money, because if you look at the data, as Shaquille has talked about, we are way above average in cost per pupil, and we are significantly below average in results. So the answer is not just to do more of the same. The answer is to re-engineer the system. What should we do? How should we do it? Who should do it? And anybody who opposes competition is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
I agree.
By the way, the budget doesn't mention any of the things that you guys are discussing. Like I said, if you go through the budget, all it is social causes. It has nothing to do with competitiveness, nothing to do with industries of the future, nothing to do with science, technology, engineering, math. It's pure social causes. And then the thing is, it goes under the Department of Education.
The social
And that
causes
doesn't help.
Well, it could be the Department of Social Causes. Then I think it would be a correct budget.
But the social causes don't even make sense. They talk about putting more racial diversity into schools, but at the same time, you're telling us that black kids can't learn from white teachers. So which is it? Do you want there to be only black kids in black schools with black teachers, or do you want diversity? Make up your mind. So you've just spent all this money trying to tell us one thing. Now you're going to spend the money to do the opposite. And what ends up happening is that becomes the thing that gets focused on by the education departments and the students.
All this goes through is social causes.
Well, and I want to put in a point that I don't understand at all. We have a lottery system that's for the education. The lottery system is supposed to put the money that we put into the lottery. And of course, some people win, some people don't. But the rest of it's supposed to go into the education system. And it's billions of dollars since it started. Where is that going? Where's that money going? Because
Kim,
apparently
that
it's not
varies.
going to the education system.
That varies by state. Okay.
Right.
For example, I lived in Georgia twice.
Yes.
And the governor who created the system committed that he would dedicate it to the education system. But as we all know, money is fungible, right? I mean, it's part of the issue with regard to the recent controversy regarding Iran. If they end up getting several billion more dollars, then maybe they don't end up spending it on what you don't want them to spend it on, but they can spend other money on that and then spend the money that you just gave them on something else. But in fairness, in the case of Georgia, they do have tuition-free college. That money is dedicated to give scholarships to people who graduate from high school with at least a certain grade point average. And if they do that, then they have the ability to go to a state university where the tuition, not everything, but the tuition is paid for by the state. So some states do it right, some states don't. But again, that's merit-based. I mean, people have to achieve a certain amount in high school before they get that. It's not everybody. In the case of our student loan program, it's totally out of control.
That I agree.
We're giving people money that shouldn't be going to college, to universities that we shouldn't be subsidizing, for degrees that aren't marketable. All right. And then you get a president who wants to give away part of the largest asset that we have on the balance sheet, which is student loans. This is
especially when you're in $31 trillion worth of debt and you're heading towards all the crises that we've talked about, Medicare, Social Security running out of funding, etc. And then you're making decisions like this. It is quite mind-boggling. I'll just say very quickly as well, if you can get private tutoring, I would say that is one of the greatest advantages that you can get. I had some of that when I was at school. And I'll tell you, I would rather have a 21-year-old, student at university come and teach my kids maths rather than a teacher do it, because that kid's, the best that they can be in maths or whatever other subject that you're talking about. And it would cost a lot less, actually. The royal family has private tutoring for their kids. If it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for all of us. And frankly, for the teachers' unions that are worried about there being all these teachers out of work, not at all. If the teachers are really good, then and you're giving funding for tutoring, which means that there's a much lower student to teacher ratio, you would actually have a lot more educators. So there'd be competition all the way around, and it would be so much better as far as outcomes are concerned. It would also mean that kids can learn at their own pace. The things that they're already proficient in, you don't need to focus on as much. Where they're lacking, you can focus on that and bring them up to speed. You would just have so many better results. I don't know why there is any opposition to this in the United States or elsewhere.
Part of it also deals with what David just briefly touched on. It's the public sector unions. Unfortunately, I had some experience with that, and so did my wife, with the public sector unions. They make it difficult unless you think the way they think to get a job in teaching. And the way they think is, pure, let's not teach anything hard, let's candy coat everything. And so it can be very frustrating to have to deal with the public school system. I tried, my wife tried, and it's like next to impossible. At first, I thought charter schools were bad because it takes away from the public schools. Then I realized the public school system sucks. You better have charter schools, because without charter schools, you have no competition. The public sector unions have a stranglehold. You can have a master's degree, a PhD, and you can't even teach there because you have to go through their indoctrination program to teach there. So the first thing you got to do, create the charter schools so that the public school unions lose their grip on purported education, which your kids aren't getting. My grandkids.
We need to keep culture, or I think we need to start re-infrastructuring our public schools to work more like charter schools. The charter schools are free. Anyone can apply for them. My sister, who was, extremely impoverished there for a while, when she was raising her 3 children by herself and couldn't get any support from anywhere, she put her kids in the charter school because it was a little bit better attention for them, and it worked very well. And I loved it. I loved the fact that it was uniforms. The kids weren't into, I'm wearing this, it was very infrastructured on education. And And it just met a good social need in the area. And I think all of our schools can become that. I really do. But the amount of money we have in our society that it gets wasted, I think it can be pumped back into the education system and become better. And their education was good. Their education was
Maybe we ought to talk for a minute about our own experiences. From my standpoint, I have 2 children, and my wife and I strongly preferred to put them in the public schools, which were much more diverse, if the public school was decent.
right.
And strongly preferred that. In certain circumstances, the public schools weren't decent, and therefore we had to put them in private school. But even when we put them in private school, we wanted a school that was diverse not only with regard to the population of students, but diverse with regard to academics, athletics, music, etc., where you get a well-rounded education, even if it meant that we had to send them all the way across town, which was the case in Atlanta, rather than to several of the, let's say, more homogeneous schools that were very close to where we lived. And so, again, I mean, there needs to be more competition. We need to link resources to results. And these are fundamental principles that are critically important for education, but frankly, apply across the board.
I'd like to elaborate. We keep saying competition. I meant to break this out. So what's interesting is there should be competition in different areas. So it's not just quality, but also competition over topics. So maybe one school wants to teach, and the third thing is thought. So let's say a school wants to teach a liberal agenda. Okay, if you want to send your kids there, fine. Let's say you want to send your kids to a school that teaches America is great. Well, you could send your schools there. Same thing with topics. If you want to send your kids to a school that teaches reading, writing, and math more than focuses on some other topics, then you have the right. So this is why individual freedom should drive the results. And Kim is right. More money should be spent, but it should be driven towards encouraging the charter schools to compete with the with the public schools, so that the public schools become more like the charter schools.
Exactly.
I would just say, before going and spending more money, and David, you can perhaps comment on this, but I would suggest, and not just for your own country, it's something I'm suggesting here in my countries that I live in. I think that there should be an audit, actually, of all of the expenditure that goes on in all of these different programs that we're paying for collectively as taxpayers, to say, where exactly is our money going? We just had this come up with the Indigenous voice to Parliament over here, where very vocal Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders said, look, we're spending all this money, but none of it's getting to the people. So I think the taxpayer has a right to know how much of the dollar that is spent on education is actually going to the students' education versus being eaten up by all these other administrators.
Exactly.
And, they want to build a new flash building and all that sort of stuff.
Good point. And they did do a study recently, Shaquille, and when the budgets increased for education, 75% was spent on administration, 25% on teachers. So there was a study that most people, when they say let's increase money for education, it did not go to teachers, and certainly did not go to improving the curriculum, improving the outcome of the United States versus the rest of the world, because the unions don't want to disclose what we're disclosing.
Yeah.
K through
That's
12,
exactly what Peter
we're
Bennett
not
is
even in
talking
the
about, I
top
think, what he says.
25 countries. I haven't looked to see if Australia beats the United States,
Yes,
but
we
we're
do.
beaten by.
Yeah.
So, do you guys feel?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. But let me, if I
this
can
is
jump in
this is
for a
horrible.
second.
We were in the top 5.
If
We're
you
in the
put,
top 5 of everything. Now we're
if you put
not even
private
in the top.
for-profit companies in there to compete with not-for-profit charter schools and charity-run schools and foundational-run schools, as well as public schools, you'll probably find that the privately run schools and some of the charity-run schools are going to shrink that administrative cost. That means more money directly into education. I think that's why a school voucher program across the Western world actually would be really, really effective in getting those better results. And we have to do something.
Let me jump in for a second. I don't think we need more money in education. I think we waste a huge amount of money.
Exactly.
I don't think we need more money in defense. I think we waste a huge amount of money. The real question is, what are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success? What are we doing as compared to that? What kind of results are we getting? The fact is that there are audits that are done of the Department of Education and every other major department and agency in the federal government, but they're financial audits. And all the financial audit does is to say, all right, it provides accountability over the resources. It does not say that you're operating in an economical, efficient, effective, ethical, moral, or any other basis. All right. And so it gives people a false sense of security that when the Department of Education gets a unqualified opinion on its financial statements, that everything's okay. When in reality, the problem that we have is we're not getting results. We're not getting results. No matter how much money you have, we're not getting results. And the idea of throwing more money at a system that is getting worse results with the passage of time is, as Einstein would say, if you give the same, something to the effect that if you keep on doing the same thing with the same people over and over again and expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity.
That's beautiful.
And when
Well
we go,
said, David. Well said.
Yeah, when we go back to the budget, though, like I said, science, there is no objectives in education. Let's throw all the money. And when I went through that, let's throw all the money to Head Start. Let's throw it to social causes. Let's throw it to what, but nothing says, let's throw it into science so that the United States moves into, remember, we're not even the top 20 in science in the world. Okay. There's no objectives, David, in the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. None whatsoever. So if you're doing an MBA, and Peter and I both have MBAs, we used to have management by objective was a big thing. Okay. What about management with no objective?
Jimmy Carter was for that too. Also zero-based budgeting.
Right. Management.
Yeah.
Well, how about
I love
with
this
no
budget.
objectives? There is
Page
no
3 or
objective.
4
in
of it
this
says
budget.
that it's about delivering results for the American people. Now, I'm not American, but you guys are. How do you feel about the results you've got so far? You
Yeah,
happy
but
with
they
these ones?
don't even define results. All they have to do is put in a budget, we're going to allocate this money so we can move the United States in the top 20 in science. Seriously.
Well,
but they don't even have an objective to be in the
But
top
if you're
20.
you're coming to a
outspending
point.
your peer group.
I don't get it.
What's the difference? You might as well double the budget. You're still going to get the same result. You're only spending 90 billion now, but you're outspending your peer group per student, and
Yeah.
you're still falling behind. Clearly, it's not a money issue. Clearly, there's something else.
No, it's not a money issue. They have no objectives. David, as you say, there is no plan.
Yeah,
with the
there's no
Department of
plan. And the
Education.
other thing is that one of the things that I pushed when I was Comptroller General, not only that we needed a plan, and by the way, every department and agency has a plan, has a strategic plan. What we don't have is that we don't have a consolidated plan for the U.S. government. All right. The problem is the plans that a lot of these departments and agencies have don't have something that I've been advocating for years. It's called key performance indicators. What are we trying to accomplish?
Right.
How do we measure success? How are we doing as compared to plan? Are we getting better or worse? How do we compare to a competitor or comparator groups? That's only when you have all of those answers do you know how you're doing. Because even if we're getting better, if we're still way below average internationally, that's not good enough. Okay. And so these are fundamental principles that the government has not been following and needs to start following.
Yeah, and if you
You
go
know, the
further,
teachers have to do that. The teachers have to be accountable for everything and whether their students are passing. There is a certain level that they do the KPIs and make people, and the students have to take tests. I think somewhere from the middle of the infrastructure up, the money's being misallocated and misspent. I agree with David. We already have the money there. It just needs to be allocated with an agenda. It needs to be allocated with a purpose, and it's not. I think it's just being pocketed by other people and misused.
I would point out that, there are entrenched interests and things are not even going the right direction, because look at national testing. First of all, there's a movement in states and various places to say, oh, national testing isn't fair. So they want to do away with testing. So, any school can give somebody an A if there's no standards, no equal measures. But the other thing is now the colleges are saying, oh, maybe you don't have to take the SATs, and it's like, okay, so if you're in a locality that just gives out A's, oh, you've got great, you might as well go to Harvard. It's going the wrong direction, and the federal government needs to step in at the college level, at the public school level, to create competition, and the whole thing needs to be revised. And so many other areas in the government do.
You'll be pleased to know that one of our top universities in Australia, you Americans have exported some of your bad ideas, and they've now said we're no longer going to be admitting people based on merit. We're going to be admitting people based on diversity. What are you talking about? This makes no sense. And if standardized testing is such a bad idea, then why do you require people to sit for a driving test? Doesn't matter if you went through the red light. Doesn't matter if you can't change gears. No problems. Here's a driver's license, because none of that matters. In fact, we'll judge it on, can you do feminist dance? No problems. Off you go. Here's your license.
Well, Nick, it sounds like you guys have plenty to talk about. And lady, I need to go to a meeting downtown Washington. So
Help them out, David.
you guys
Have
continue
fun.
the conversation. I look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next
I
week.
hope everybody who celebrates Thanksgiving has a great Thanksgiving.
All right.
Happy
Will do.
Thanksgiving.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you.
See you next week.
So I'm looking at the budget. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the budget that Nick sent
I
out
haven't
to us,
seen
but
it.
having a look through it on the last few pages, it actually shows what the projections are, which I think are, look, they're projections. It's hard to project a decade out, but between now and 2033, they're expecting to have another $17 trillion in deficits added to your national debt. So you're going to go from 31 trillion to almost 50 trillion. But don't worry, Peter, it's not too bad. You're also
Wait,
expecting
Shaquille,
$14
you're
trillion
probably only talking about
economy.
on the books, right?
On the books, that's right.
Shaquille, but it's the off the books that they won't even discuss the fact that there's no money for Medicare that they were supposed to be putting away in Social Security, and so it's just so phenomenal. I have read that the amount potentially that the U.S. government, again, all world governments I've looked at countries in Europe, countries in Asia, China, South America, they're all in the same rough situation in terms of their retirement plans and their Medicare or healthcare budgets. And what they've done is they basically have no money put aside for this huge tidal wave of debt coming. It's going to affect everybody. And it's either, I always go into this in Wall Street Hackers, and it's either going to go one of two directions. And this will be how it will affect people. For years, I couldn't even figure out, how are they going to deal with this? But one thing I figured out is the most likely scenario is we're going to be heading for zero interest debt or negative interest. So inflation, even if it's at 2 or 3 or 4, and probably it'll never get below 3 again in the United States, will be at 3 maybe, and negative interest rates are 0. So it's going to be it's going to affect the whole economy. But countries cannot afford to pay interest on this amount that maybe, I've read, is more money unfunded than all privately held houses, stocks, and bonds in the United States, and it's similar in other countries. It's just, you can't print that much money without an effect. So one, it'll have an effect, and 2, it's just, they're going to try to control it. If they don't control it, it's going to be massive Zimbabwe inflation. But I think they're going to use what's called bond yield curve control, which has been done in the United States, done in Japan, and they're going to drive the government will drive the interest rates down to 0 or negative. It's the only way they can deal with this. And even then,
I would expect
Yield curve
massive
control only
inflation.
works on the short end. It's very difficult to do that on the longer end because of the markets. Look, if you can freeze some of the spending, if you can look, when Biden took over, and look, I understand it was COVID, but if he was able to not increase spending by too much, with that extra increase in government revenue would have taken care of things as inflation comes up. As long as spending was controlled a little bit. One of the things that I would say with the United States usually, historically, has been quite aggressive in promoting free market ideals and ideas. So things like if you buy an item for a business, why can't you write that off straight away? Why do you need to amortize it over a period of time? It doesn't make any difference anyway to revenue. It's a revenue neutral change, but it means that those businesses can get that money back that same year. That's going to have a huge impact. Things like your social security system. Australia had a social security system that was somewhat similar to you guys. We recognized decades ago that, look, this is going to be a problem later on. We've introduced a thing called superannuation. You guys have got a similar thing over there with 401k accounts and other types of pension plans. But why not allow people to do that instead of them paying into social security, which is sort of told to Americans as if it's insurance when it doesn't operate as insurance at all. Let people have a little bit more say as to how that money is going to be invested. Let them put it into the markets. Let them put it into other places. And just lastly, to your point about the unfunded liabilities, prior to COVID, the estimate of the total value of the stock market in the US was about 80 trillion. You guys have got 200 trillion in debts or in unfunded liabilities. This is ridiculous. I do believe the housing market and the total value of the real estate market in the US is worth more than that, but this is not healthy. It really isn't. And as you said, Peter, very rightly so, it's not just the US, it's all over the world that has these issues. And it's the most powerful countries, it's the so-called wealthiest countries in the world that are experiencing this. So I'm not sure what school they all went to, but something's gone wrong.
No
Well,
financial
they
education in
do
those
not
schools.
do well in math.
Potentially.
Shaquille, I don't think they do well in math because remember, we don't even hit the top 25 in mathematics in the world. And part of it is this. There was the head of the ARP, Joe Ann, whatever her name is. And she put on LinkedIn, don't touch Social Security and don't touch Medicare. Okay, here's the reality. If you don't touch Social Security, you don't touch Medicare, it will go broke and there will be no Social Security and Medicare. But her sending that out there, then everybody goes on the LinkedIn line saying, oh, I agree with her. Don't touch Social Security. Don't touch Medicare. I agree with her. Don't touch it. Hey, the math doesn't make any sense. Social Security is going broke next decade. Medicare goes broke this decade. All right. So whether she likes it or not, you're going to be forced to make changes in Social Security.
That is the common thought, but my thought is the opposite, that it won't go broke because the government is going to, in the end, print money, and then print money.
Okay, but
that'll be the only viable solution because they promise they can't.
I agree.
Yeah,
Peter, I agree. That's probably what their solution is going to be, and the cost will be inflation.
Oh, absolutely. And that will mean those dollars that people are getting aren't worth that much anymore.
Exactly.
Because of that.
I did a study of this about 15 years ago when I was actually studying finance. Sorry, Kim.
Okay. Well, what I was going to point out is majority of our leaders who are making all these decisions, they never had a financial literacy course. They all probably passed algebra, calculus, geometry, science, but none of them really took a financial literacy course. And our country is showing the results of this. They're just doing things, knee jerking, oh, let's just send everyone PPP loans and in millions of dollars, don't make them pay it back, even though it's a loan, forgive them. They're not thinking, they could have even done a 0% interest payback, but they didn't even do that. So what I'm saying is that you have a lot of people who are just knee jerk thinking, who don't have the education to do a financial plan for our country. They can do geometry and they all passed geometry and they all graduated from college. But and Nick, you know this. This is why we started the TV show. Nobody ever had financial literacy. And that's our problem with this country.
So I did a study of this back when I was studying finance, 15, 20 years ago. My numbers are probably going to be a little bit off because it's coming from memory and it's, things would have changed a little bit. But I did a study of what was the actual return that a person who paid into Social Security actually received on their money. And it worked out by my calculation to be about 0.8%.
Yeah.
So my suggestion to you would be, if you're an American and you think Social Security shouldn't be touched, give people the choice. So, Peter Bennett, you're working. here's your choice. You can leave your retirement funds in the government-run program that's going to give you 0.8%, or you can do something else with it. Now, maybe there'll be some restrictions and you have to have an advisor or whatever, but you can have a bit more control. What would you prefer? Are you happy with the 0.8%, or would you like something else?
So Shaquille, I have a question for you, because this is something I always wrestle with, and I don't have an answer on this, so I'm not taking a position, but here's my question. So if they privatized Social Security directly, indirectly, let's say they said, well, you can put in, half your money into the stock market. And you tell me, but wouldn't that just drive the market up quickly now? And then after that, that would be like forward gains pushed forward. And then after that, maybe there would be more capital in the market, admittedly, for an IPO. But let's say you're an existing company and, you're Verizon or, Exxon or whatever. And now your price just went up because there's a massive amount of Social Security funds going into that. So aren't you just pushing the gains forward, or am I wrong? Because I don't have an opinion on this. I can't figure it out.
Potentially, yes. But it's worth noting that the rest of the world, I mean, most Australians have what we call superannuation. And most of that money is invested in the US stock market. So we're benefiting from your market. So why don't you guys? All right. But back to your main point, yes, that may well be true, but there's actually some benefits to that, because not all of the money has to go directly into the stock market. You might want to invest in, real estate, or you might want to invest in, interest rate based products, which gives a lot more money to the banks or to shadow banks, other financial institutions that can make small business loans, etc. Now, normally there are some restrictions on the amount of risk that you're taking in these sort of retirement-based accounts. You may also find something that Nick does, insurance and pension plans and things like that. That might be something that fits as part of your portfolio. Or in your case, Peter, you have a much more diversified portfolio than I do because I'm a much more active trader. You might look at, okay, I want to put some money into gold. I want to put some money into all these different things. But the point being that I think you're better off letting people have the choice, come what may. Maybe it doesn't work out quite as well as you would have hoped, but I cannot imagine that it would be worse for the country than what you currently have.
They can't do that, Shaquille, because here's the problem. All right. When the money goes into Social Security, they take the money from the Social Security Trust Fund to buy U.S. debt. They use it to buy the U.S. debt.
That's true. It's not there.
So the money isn't there. So the reason they can't do what you're saying, what you're saying is totally true. They can take it, invest in asset allocation, do much better in the market. But the problem is the U.S. is so much in debt, and they have to issue more debt. Joe Biden's budget is asking for another $1.7 trillion in debt. So they're going to have to issue bonds. Nobody's going to buy these stupid bonds. You know who buys those bonds? The Social Security Trust Fund.
Well, and the insurance companies and banks that have to buy them. But this is precisely the problem. The everyday hardworking American family, right, the middle class, because they're the ones paying into all this. Okay. They are actually what's happening is the money's being stolen from them. That's my view of it. The government and those people at the top are stealing that money. And then when you come up with things like let's increase the pension age or let's decrease benefits, that's a default. Yeah. Again, if I was running a product, Peter's been paying into this product for a whole heap of time. Then I say, look, Peter, I've got this great deal for you. I'm going to pay you less, and I'm going to pay you later. That would be a default. Peter would sue the hell out of me. But the government does, and it's like, we're just trying to stabilize the system. No, you're ripping off the life savings and the hard work of the middle class, and that is not a fair thing to do.
And you know what? What they're going to do is print the money.
Right.
And you're right, it's going to hurt the middle class.
And what will happen?
Well, because when you print that money and you have high inflation, it
exactly. You'll have high inflation and low growth.
Yeah. So what you get is the people at the top that already own all the assets, their asset prices go up, and everybody else is left scrambling to try and pay their grocery bills.
But inflation is a quiet tax on everything. So this way, they don't have to increase your taxes. They do not have to decrease the expenditure. But when you go to McDonald's and buy a hamburger, you're going to be spending $15,000 for a McDonald's hamburger. Why? Because we need the money to pay off the national debt. And so you're going to see huge inflation because the people do not want to make the hard decisions to keep the economy straight. And I can tell you, the person in the ARP on LinkedIn goes, don't touch Social Security and Medicare. Don't have it part of the conversation of the national debt and deficit. What are your thoughts? We'll bring that next week on Economics Monday. But I was going like, are you kidding me? The thing is unsound. It's like it's going to blow up. It's like the SpaceX missile. I just saw that went up and blew up. Okay, that's what's going to happen with Social Security and Medicare. And she's saying
that's what they should do. They should say to everybody who's
don't
on
talk
Social
about
Security,
it.
look, we gave it to NASA, we flew it up into
What
space.
happens if
That's
we
where
don't
your
talk
money
about
is.
it?
Well, if you don't talk about it, then the thing is it'll go away, Peter.
Yeah,
So
that's like an
don't-
ostrich.
It's not like an ostrich, right?
It's not
Don't
always
talk-
this good
She
strategy.
literally said, don't talk about Social Security and Medicare as part of the national debt conversation. Don't even discuss it. Don't touch it. Okay. Yet at the same time, it's like saying, hey, this thing's going to explode, but let's not talk about it. But we'll talk about it at a future time on Economics Monday. We're past the hour and we'll see everybody next week. Bye-bye.